To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
We're privileged to have Jenn Cirrito with us today. Jenn is a senior executive at Kforce. I was with Kforce for 15 years. Jenn and I never were in the same chain of command, but we knew each other. In fact, Jenn was my daughter's leader, which is the ultimate test. So thank you for that, Jenn. You led her well. She's always grateful for that. And so you've got a rich background. Tell us a little bit more. What do we need to know about Jenn Cirrito?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. I am actually a retired scientist, believe it or not. I spent some time working in a few different laboratories right out of my university days, both after my undergraduate degree and my master's degree. And I think back to my time growing up in the Midwest, and as long as I can remember, I have always really wanted to be in a position to help others. At the time, I thought that meant like maybe I should be a medical doctor. I'm going to go to school for biology and chemistry, and I want to be a doctor. Well, I didn't want to work doctor hours at the end of the day or spend, which is funny because I think I probably work doctor hours today, but or spend that much time, completing my education. But I found some different ways to help people in my professional career over the last couple of decades, but I still leverage my training, my research experience, and ultimately my education from a scientific perspective. I was a Division I athlete. I played volleyball in college, and I still do my very best to maintain kind of the athlete descriptor today. I'm very competitive. I stay fit, and really that keeps me sharp and able to keep up with my very active children.
Yeah.
And as for my professional career today, I support the people and customers of Kforce, and have for almost the last 18 years. I started at Kforce back in 2005 as a junior recruiter, an entry-level recruiter. I've transitioned through many roles over the years, but my current role today is Senior Vice President of Operations. I know you know, Mike, but Kforce is a professional staffing and solutions firm. We're based out of Tampa, Florida. I am located here in Florida as well, and we have an office occasional culture. So the benefit of supporting teams all across the United States, I get great joy from having people from Seattle all the way down to Miami. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, look, a little going back a little bit. Where did you go to school? Where did you get your undergrad and master's degree, and what were those degrees in?
Yep. My undergraduate degree is from Youngstown State University. I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, so Youngstown was about an hour and a half from my hometown. I was recruited. I was the first one to go to college in my family, but recruited my senior year to play volleyball. I had a full scholarship for all 4 years that I was there. So that was a great joy to my parents. They didn't have to pay for my college. And then I worked at the Cleveland Clinic Foundation for a bit after graduation and realized maybe I wanted to do some more work on the education side. So I went to Texas Tech University for my master's degree. I got a master's in microbiology there. So not at all what I do today, but anyone that asks, that's like the number one question after people look at my LinkedIn profile. And it's like, your training and your education, at the end of the day, I'm using the scientific method in everything I do, trying to observe a trend or, create a hypothesis and test that, not even just in business, but in life. So I use this every day.
I remember was it Dan Turner hired you?
Yeah, Dan hired, and he said, I remember this interview. I remember exactly what I was wearing that day and where we were at in the corporate headquarters in Ybor. Mike,
Yep.
you remember that second floor was entirely open.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so you were like a spectacle coming out of the elevator, and everyone's like, who's the new person, walking to Dan's office at
Yeah.
the very other end of the building. And so yeah, Dan did hire me, Dan did interview me, and I was under his leadership for several years right out of the gate. So one of my very first leaders that I can attribute, some of my success to.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit deeper so people fully understand what you're doing today. Like what departments, what functions roll up to you, Jenn?
Yep. So my role as SVP of Ops, once we make a match for our customers, so we find our candidate an opportunity for our client, that's really where my teams kick in. We do everything from establishing credit with our customers to setting up their preferences and servicing terms. We onboard our consultants, all of the paperwork and compliance requirements to get them ready to go. We work through all of the time capture on a weekly basis, what people are working and their expenses and things like that. And we process all of that through our billing and collections, and ultimately the offboarding of our consultants. There's a lot that goes into all of that. I know you know that. I know you had some oversight over this, over these teams in the past, but essentially from that offer all the way through offboarding, all of those steps my teams are responsible for.
Yeah, good. Well, listen, I always start off with a couple of standard questions at the beginning of these podcast episodes. So if I didn't know who you were, Jenn, we met and we're on an elevator. We got 35 floors. I'm not going to be with you long, but I found out you're an executive with Kforce, and I asked you, Jenn, I want to be a leader. What is your philosophy of leadership? We only got about a minute, so what would you say? An executive summary of Jenn Cirrito's philosophy of leadership?
Yeah, I would say character and care are a huge part of the success formula. There is a success formula, in my opinion. I care a lot about the people that I support, and that support me. And I think, your character has to be one where your integrity is a non-negotiable, and that there's some humility as a part of the equation too, so that you're relatable. We have a responsibility as leaders to model the way for our people, and that is 100% of the time. As 100% of the time, the other thing I would say is, leadership is not a hat that you just take on and you take off. I strive to be a leader in my daily life, in my professional life, in my family life, and in my business life. So for me, character and care, really are the big parts of the success formula.
Yeah, I love it. So character, you're singing my song. I tell people I'll accept just about any mistake, but I will never tolerate a lapse of character. Never. If you do that and it's proven you do that, you're out the door that day, I want to talk a little bit about care, though. I also agree that, care is a big deal. And you're a leader, Jenn, but you've also been led. I say that even the youngest kid right out of college or not even college, you inject them in any environment, sports, academics, family, whatever, and they can just tell whether their leader cares about them. It cannot be faked. A lot of people try to fake it, but do you agree? I want to hear your thoughts on this. I say, someone works with you within an hour or two, and certainly within a few days, they get a feel for you. She really cares about me. Thoughts?
Yeah. Mike, I think this is one of the lessons that I've taken away over the years, and maybe one of the things I've been testing along the way too, because care hasn't always been part of the equation at Kforce. I say that more broadly, yes.
Yeah.
Kforce has been a wonderful place to work. I've been there almost 20 years, and the many people that I've come in to contact with have always been looking out for me. But that's a softer skill, I think, sometimes, and maybe it's existed, but it hasn't been prioritized. And I've really challenged my style over the years because I have always genuinely cared about the people that I support and ultimately support me. And I thought that maybe that was a fault and maybe not something I should place so much emphasis on. I've really been testing that. And as I've developed and matured in my role, this is just part of me and part of my culture. And I think people respond very well to it. Especially as we've gone through the last several years, Mike, COVID has really changed the way that we work and how we interact with each other and the things that have, become more important to people. And I think this has served us very well, that we have been in a position to genuinely care and be interested in the well-being of our people. They want to give more back to us. They're connected, and they truly are part of the family. So I think care is a big part of the equation, and one that I will keep in that equation for as long as I'm doing this. And I feel really good about how I've tested that over the years, because with a little bit of care, I've been able to get, more out of people, over the years. So.
Yeah, well said. Well, I am big on the term world class. I heard it years ago, and I love it. World class meaning, at a world level, was not in the cards for me to be a world-class athlete, but I realized pretty quickly I was in the Marine Corps. I read an article. That's when I got exposed to it. It was during the 76 Olympics, Jen, and a world-class, like, what the hell is world-class? World-class athletes. And it was on leadership, this article, and there were several institutions worldwide that were known to be world-class at developing leaders, and the U.S. Marine Corps was listed. And I was like, I am a young leader in the Marine Corps. And so where I'm going with this is I realized very quickly, certainly wasn't going to be a world-class athlete, was not going to be a world-class academician. I was not going to be world-class at much, but I realized, if I work hard at this, I can really learn to become a really good leader. Right. So this is the money question. I maintain, regardless of natural aptitude or talent, that anyone with the desire and the willingness to put in the reps into this, what I call the great leadership laboratory, I think that they can become not only a good leader, I think that they can become a world-class leader, not necessarily in a world-class organization. I think there are world-class leaders in Kforce that may be in charge of the mailroom, tech support, or whatever. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Leadership, a learned skill, and can people of all stripes, shapes, and sizes learn it to the point where they are really among the best in the world at leading their teams?
Yeah, I think leadership is absolutely a learned skill. I would say, though, that there's a spark, there's a little something that's just waiting for the right conditions, to light it. I think I heard you reference this as a chip in the motherboard at some point in one of your podcasts. But yeah, I mean, I think in all of the years, as I consider myself a leader today. It took a long time to get there, but in all of my years at Kforce, when I started there, I wasn't a leader. I was a leader for my volleyball team. Before I was a captain, and I had leadership experience. My mother, my father, etc. But I really believe that there is a self-awareness that's necessary, that there is the need to be comfortable tinkering and watching and observing and paying attention to the things that are going on around you, and ingesting that and playing with it a little bit to see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. I think there's a need for a level of confidence too. Being willing to ask uncomfortable questions, have hard conversations, be vulnerable, raise your hand, those type of things. Because some of the leadership is the people around you need to look to you for direction or support. And when they see you doing these things, it's a very natural way to kind of earn that responsibility. I think the life experiences that we have can really make someone a leader if they are truly reflecting, practicing, putting in the reps, et cetera. And then kind of the last thing I would say, Mike, is, I think back to my life experiences, and there has been many times where I wanted to quit. Something got really hard, or I didn't see a path forward, but I didn't because I'm not a quitter, and there's always a lesson in those experiences. And I think there's a bit of grit that comes to play here. When you talk about leaders being born or made, I think the made part is you got to have a little grit. You got to be willing to put in the reps and put in the work and go through the fight, to learn things on the other side. So I think the shorter answer is made, but I do think there's a little spark that our extra special leaders are born with.
I want to roll into the next question. I ask everybody this. You have, you've got a lot of experience, so you have studied, worked with, observed a lot of leaders. So let's talk about, in your view, the top 10% of the very best leaders you've ever seen. Have you identified, or can you identify, any traits, habits, or skills that most of the very best have in common?
Yeah, I think, Mike, strong character is first and foremost. The leaders that are willing to do the work, whatever that means in your own industry or your business. The best that I have had lean in to challenges. They lean into learning. Lean in is overused these days, in my opinion, but I do think it's a skill. They're not afraid to, put themselves out there and tinker and try to learn new things. And one that's really important for me personally, and that I strive to do every day with my team, is making the connection, like a real connection with people, the people on your team. A couple other things that I think are also just generally very important is leaders that value preparation. Preparation is a skill, and the best that I have worked for that value preparation, we have much better conversations, we take much better action. The outcome is always better too. And over the last several years, one thing that came into full focus for me is just transparency, overall transparency. The leadership at Kforce has been very transparent as we went through the COVID era, and now that we're on the backside of it. And I have seen that we have gotten more from people by just being uber transparent in how we communicate. So those are kind of the simple things that the best have done for me.
Well, they're good ones. I agree, they're simple, but boy, they're so hard for so many to do, So let's turn the coin over. Unfortunately, if you're like me, you've seen the let's just call them the least effective leaders. I don't call them bad leaders, but let's face it, there are bad, ineffective leaders out there. Good people for the most part, but they're not getting it. I think it would be instructive for the audience to find out if you've also identified any habits, traits, skills or lack thereof that are common in the least effective leaders.
Yeah, and fortunately for me, there's not been a ton of opportunity where I've been working with someone or for someone that, maybe I was like, man, I really wish they would have done this different. But generally speaking, I think from a leadership perspective, those that don't follow through, there's integrity. Do what you say you're going to do. That's really important. Whatever it is, it could be big or it could be small. I also find it when people are different in their real life, like they're putting on an act in the office, and then there's somebody completely different in their real life. To me, that just doesn't really strike a chord. A leader is always a leader. That's not the hat you take off. So I love to be able to work for people that are always, paying attention to what they're doing and how they're working with people and being real, frankly, being real. From a not an ideal skill perspective, I would also say getting too comfortable. We all know those leaders, Mike, that they've made it to the certain title or the certain rank or corner office or whatever it might be, and then they just get comfortable. The best, in my opinion, are always tinkering with their style, with their business, with the things that matter in their day-to-day, and are comfortable asking for feedback. So when people just get comfortable and they stop asking for feedback, to me, that's an ineffective quality of a leader.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. I want to talk about trust. And I know you share my views. I mean, I value trust so much. I named my book after it, trust-based leadership. I mean, without that, you can have all the technique in the world, well intentions, but if you don't trust people, if they don't know you trust them and they don't reciprocate, mediocre results at best. That's what Mike says.
Right.
I think you share that opinion, and I'd like to know your thoughts on trust. And some ways, I know leaders out there are waiting for your words. You're an experienced executive. What are some ways that how can they show their people they trust them? And how can they develop a culture of trust?
Yeah. We have high expectations at Kforce, but that comes along with strong accountability. And trust isn't developed overnight. It sometimes takes years, but I give people an opportunity to show me that they trust me and I trust them, so I lean in from a trust perspective. So we're starting there. The other thing I would say, Mike, is I just read The Wisdom of a Bullfrog, Admiral McCraven's book, and he talks about a shepherd should smell like it's sheep. As a leader, I want to be connected to the business. I want to be influencing the team and the decisions. I believe that sets a tone and a level of trust with the larger team because we're doing it together. I'm not doing their job and they're not doing mine, but we each have our own responsibilities and we're doing it together. That establishes a sense of trust. And the culture that I have within I think people would say that I have built within my teams at Kforce is no matter who you work with on my team, out of the 250 people, you're always going to get the same experience. We follow through, we hold ourselves accountable, we show up prepared, we ask good questions. So when my partners rely on me to support them or their teams, that to me is building a sense of trust. They trust, they know what they're going to get. It's a known entity. So, you can test people and you can do different things, but to me, it's, showing up, being who you are and having high expectations. And when those things aren't met, there's conversations or there's things that come from that. But I like to think my partners know what they're going to get. I'm a known entity. They know what they're going to get with me and my teams. And to me, that means we've established a very high level of trust in the business.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to offer this to you. You said two profound things. One in the last statement. The first, I always teach leaders, and I was taught as a leader, brand new. Probably the first leadership class I ever had is, character is number one, of course. But you have to be yourself. You have to be yourself always, because nobody can act 24 hours a day. And so a great compliment would be that someone knew you or me in our private lives and said, you're the same here as you are at work. Right. I'm not putting on an act, and neither are you, I love that. And then, as far as trust goes, I want to make sure we clarify this, and I think you agree on this. I'll give you a chance to talk, but I go in trusting everybody. I assume everybody has the best intent. As an experienced leader, I also do not assume that everybody has the same level of competence or training or sense of urgency. So I trust you, but initially when I get to know you, I'm going to supervise you pretty closely. And the more I can see that you're on top of your game and you can be a self-starter and you deserve that freedom of action, I'm going to pull back the supervision. I'll never stop supervising, but I won't over supervise. But initially, I trust but verify, as the late
Yep.
great Ronald Reagan used to say. Any thoughts?
I completely agree. I take out a bit of an insurance policy on new leaders or new people, and that I'm monitoring the work and I'm staying close to it. I'm not micromanaging it, but I am close enough to know if we're on track or not. And eventually over time, less of that is necessary as people prove themselves. But I think that couples with this culture of we do what we say we're going to do, et cetera, like that all comes together so that that trust chain builds, I think, faster in a culture where there's high accountability and high expectations. But yes,
Yeah.
Mike, to answer your question, I 100% agree. And if they can't get there, then you know that quickly and to move on. That's not something that you can support for the long term.
Yeah. I want to give you an anecdote that you're probably not aware of, but your CEO, Joe Liberatore, I think you are aware that him and I got promoted on the same day. They made me the chief services officer in charge of most of the back office. And they did a scandalous move and they made a non-finance guy the CFO. And as you know, in a publicly traded company, to take a non-finance, non-CPA, non-accountant, no financial background and make him the CFO of a publicly traded company. I mean, people were asking Dave Dunkel, hey, what's up? Even board members like, geez, I mean, Joe's a great guy. Are you sure? And as you know, fast forward, it worked out great. But I remember that he told me that, and he wouldn't mind me sharing this, when Bill Sanders and Dave Dunkel approached him and said, Joe, we're thinking about doing this with you. What do you think? And he said, no, I'd like to do it. And Bill Sanders, did not mince words. He said, Joe, listen to me. If you are a good student, you will need Dave and me with our hands on your shoulder for at least 4 years.
Wow.
Before you're going to be able to tackle this by yourself. Because trust me, right now, you don't know what you don't know. And of course, Joe had no ego at all. And he told me later on, he said, I knew that I didn't know a lot of the finance stuff, but I also had no idea when I took over for Bill Sanders how much else Bill Sanders was doing relative to the board and investors and the Securities and Exchange Commission. He said, I had no idea. And I was in the next office. And I've been in the company almost 25 years. And so it's a great story. So my point is, they trusted Joe to do the job, but they tightly supervised him. And then over time, obviously, after a few years, I don't think it took 4 years, but over time, Joe had it, because he was a quick study, a sharp guy, and few know the industry better than him,
Right. And what great perspective to bring to that role too, from Joe's vantage point.
Oh, absolutely. Well, what he lacked in finance, he certainly had in, like I said, nobody knows the staffing industry better than him. And so it worked out great. And of course, it really did work out great. He continued to excel in every role. And now he's leading the company, which was a richly deserved promotion. I'm a big Joe Liberatore fan, as you can imagine. We're personal friends. Our sons wrestled together for years. I spent a lot of time with him at Kforce and traveling around the country. So I don't need to tell you this. You're in good shape with that leader. He's a good one.
He is wonderful. And actually, a lot of the things that we've talked about so far, I mean, Joe sets a perfect example around communication, transparency, et cetera. So very good role model there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jen, the audience may not know, you've mentioned it early on, you were a high-level athlete in college, volleyball player. And I have no doubt, as a young athlete coming up, that you knew the importance of role models, mentors, and coaches. I mean, you wouldn't have got to where you were unless you had a good mix of all three. I want to say that carried over into your professional life. And I also think that you realize that not everybody's an athlete. Not everybody's a high-level athlete. Not everybody's high-level anything. And some people, this is the first time they've ever heard of this concept, me saying it. role models, mentors, and coaches. So I'd like to get your thoughts on this relative to leaders, aspiring leaders and leaders that, really aspire to excellence. Um, what's the importance of getting these role models, mentors, and coaches? And they all serve a different role. Sometimes it can be all three. And sometimes in my case, one of my role models is Teddy Roosevelt, and I certainly never had the opportunity to talk to him, so I had to study him from afar. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I think diversity of thought and experience to me is a really big part of the success formula. And we talked about earlier in the podcast on whether leaders are made or born. Well, if we believe that they're made, why wouldn't a leader take every opportunity to learn from diversified experiences? And to the question you asked a bit ago, good experiences and bad experiences both offer an opportunity to learn. Role models to me, obviously someone to look up to and emulate, having somebody in mind or somebody like multiple people in mind, you can pull the good from those individuals and make your own role model out of that. But I'm not trying to climb the ladder as fast as I possibly can, but I'm always trying to be better. So why wouldn't I look for those qualities or those skills to, challenge myself on? Mentors can provide very real and specific feedback on scenarios, and could be available like that. There are several folks in my life that I look up to as a mentor that offer thoughts and suggestions on how to handle a scenario or, how to take my business plan forward or what have you. And they are there when I call. That's an investment though. Those type of relationships don't develop overnight. I have invested a lot in those that mentor me, and they have done the same for me. And I continue to, to value those conversations and those individuals. From a coaching perspective, Mike, man, oh man, this is like one of the things that I am so grateful for. Any opportunity where someone's like, what was it like to play sports in college? Well, I had lots of coaches. I had a weight trainer, I had a nutritionist, I had, somebody in rehabbing, plus my head coach, and they all brought something different to the table. And again, I think that diversity of thought or that diversity of experience was really, really good for me. I am a team sports player. You mentioned volleyball. It's not an individual sport. And so to have the opportunity to play as a team under a coaching staff and compete at that level, those are skills that I didn't know I was gaining at the time, but they are things that I use every day in my life. And now that my kids are in sports, it makes it easier for me to spot a good coach, or maybe one that's on the rise, or maybe one that, shouldn't be coaching my kids, and just how they're handling themselves. Because it's not just coaching the sport, it's coaching the person, it's teaching the person. So long-winded there, but I think a good combination of having something in mind, or a good role model, people that can support you daily on the way, and then, having those people that are in your court to teach you the things that you still need to learn. I think it's necessary for sure.
Yeah. I want an unscripted follow-on question. I want to get your perspective. High-level volleyball player. And I'm sure, I was a wrestler, so, there's a prototype, the body type, the length, the height, arm length, and all of that. That said, there's always exceptions. So what, from your high-level experience in volleyball, what was the height? You got to be this height to be competitive. First of all, what was that stereotype or that standard? And then the people that you saw that didn't meet that height requirement yet kicked ass on the D1 level.
Yeah.
How'd they do that? And why I'm asking this is a lot of people shirk leadership roles because, well, I don't look like a leader. I don't sound, my voice is squeaky. I'm a woman, 115 pounds. And I've seen 115-pound, 65-year-old women command the room. It has nothing to do with physical strength or anything like that. So how did these people that weren't supposed to succeed on that level, how'd they do it?
Well, I felt most at home with my volleyball team because I'm 6'2". I come from a very tall family. My brother is 6'8". So I'm always looking at tall people in the eye. And the volleyball team, the women, they were taller than me. I think we had a girl that was close to 6'5", but most everybody was at least 6 foot tall. And you knew when we were somewhere that we either played basketball or we played volleyball. You know, it was obvious people were asking those questions. So I would say 6 foot was kind of like the expectation. But then I would say there were those individuals that were not 6 feet tall. Maybe they were 5'6", or maybe they were 5'8", or what have you. But what got them to that level, I think a couple of things. One, they out hustled everybody. They had their mindset on something and they went for it. I think that's number one. Number two, they knew their role on the team. You know, they're faster, maybe they can jump higher, so maybe they have a different angle. Maybe they're excellent servers. That's where I go back to the team sport or the team in general. Everybody has a role and it's not all the same role. So I believe that the people that succeeded, you know, just to use height as an example, they brought something to the table that was their trademark skill, and they owned that and out hustled, you know, everyone to earn a place on the team. So, and they believed in themselves, Mike. I mean, that's some of it too. You know, you have to believe in yourself, or somebody has to show you that you can do it, help you see that you can do it. So volleyball was a great period in my life. But I see that now. And maybe just to give an example, I have somebody who just moved into a leadership role. For the longest time, she was like, it's not for me. It's not for me. I don't think I can do it. And we said, we believe in you. You know, we believe in you. We think you can do this. Here's why we think you can do it. Let's just practice it and see how it goes. And it's just building that confidence a little bit over time, and is hands down doing an amazing job. But for her, it was a little push maybe in that direction. And I think that's where coaches, or where, you know, mentors and others come in to help us when we don't see it ourselves.
Yeah, great answer, and a good segue into my next question. I mean, as you know, once I retired from Kforce, I got into executive coaching, leadership training, and all of that. And I suspected this. You know, I don't know if you know this, and I was hired into Kforce to start a leadership development program. So the company invested in a leadership development program, and it put a premium on it. And of course, you know, my Marine background, it's just baked into us that you're either leading people or teaching them how to become leaders. So I was big in mentorship development, held book studies with my groups and all of that. I tried to leave people better leaders than I ever was. And several of them have gone on to achieve things in the corporate world way beyond the level I were. And I'm proud of that, you know. Right. That said, and most military guys were so surrounded with formal leadership training and an ethos of leadership. All you had to do was look around and see good role models. And we had a couple bad ones, but for the most part, excellent role models. Like, that's what you do. That's how you do it. I was shocked to come out into the business world and realize that leadership development is almost non-existent, formal leadership development. So right. I trick CEOs. I go in and talk to them and say, well, what's your budget next year? Your capital is, oh, we're putting $50 million into machinery. We got this. And then I'm like, that's awesome. You know, I get them saying yes. And then I'm like, well, so what's the line, you know, how much are you investing in leadership development? And you know what I'm going to tell you? It's like nothing. Zero, big, nothing. And I'm like, guys, you know, this is you know, you're putting all this into your equipment and all of that, and you're not investing in the people that are going to execute. And so it's counterintuitive. So I mean, I'm getting long-winded. I want to ask you this. I think a lot of people listening to this podcast will say, Mike, that's the situation I'm at. My company offers nothing. And I would say that 99 out of 100 in the business world are going to be in that situation.
Right.
It's not going to come from their company. What do they do? Because the onus is always on. Even if your company provides training, you're still going to have to do a lot of self-development. So what words of advice, what did you do? You know, company doesn't provide it. What do you do to propel yourself up the leadership competency ladder, so to speak?
Sure. I had a leader back probably 15 years ago at this point. Greg Peglieri, I know you know Greg.
Yeah.
But Greg said, I want you to put a professional development plan together. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? So I'm Googling it, trying to find examples online. But what it came down to, and I share this a lot within Kforce because so many people come asking this question of me. And I share my personal plan, but I built this personal development plan, Mike, that says, what do I want to be known for at the end of the day? And, there's certain things there. And what am I good at? And where are there areas where I want to continue to develop? What are those? What roles could I see myself going into at Kforce? Thinking ahead, like, could this path take me over here, and giving some options. And, what are my goals for the year, and what are the things that I've accomplished over the last 12 months or a year or so. And I reviewed this plan with Greg at the time quarterly. It wasn't me coming and saying, hey, it's time to promote me, but it was me saying, all right, in our one-on-one this week, I'd like to review my plan with you. Here's the progress I've made. Here's some things that I'm doing. To your point, career development, it's not a huge budget for that, but there's things you can do on your own, podcast or reading or finding a mentor or investing in this area or that area, lots of things. But this plan kept me on track, Mike. It kept me focused on where I wanted to continue to develop, where I was eager to share my experience or, new roles that I could be primed for. So that worked very well for me. And I have those plans going back to 2011. And so I've seen the progression over time. And I think they're a big part of the success formula for me, because it wasn't just, I think I'm ready for this role, or wasn't just, I want to learn these skills, but it was kind of all encompassing from a leadership perspective. And it allowed me, to be front and center with my leader at that time. And then he could offer feedback and challenge me as well. That would be one thing. Another thing, and this is probably in the last 5 to 7 years, Mike, but a girlfriend of mine asked me to be a part of her personal board of directors. She is an IT executive, and we call it our P-bot. I had to Google it again. Thank goodness for Google, because I didn't know what it was, but it was a big thing coming out of GE. And, there's a lot of people that use this personal board of directors concept. But for me, it pulled a group of folks together that had very diversified backgrounds. One's in insurance, one was in packaging, one was in IT. I came from the staffing industry, and we would have topics, or we have topics, or we have, if there's a business problem, and we come together to challenge each other and offer perspective. For me, I've been at Kforce for almost 20 years. It's all that I know. So having others offer me, thoughts or ideas on, the business challenges I'm having, that has been something that I can do organically. It doesn't cost a lot of money, and it gives me access to people, to help weigh in on some of the things that I'm working on. Those are a couple of things that I'm doing besides reading and, some of the basics. But those two things have been critically important to my success over the years.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember when you got there, and I remember I think it was Dan Turner, the one that hired you. Yeah, so I remember, and at the risk of embarrassing you, you came in, he had a hunch you to do well, and you weren't in a really significant leadership role. I don't know if you were in a leadership role to start off with, but the bottom line is you identified yourself. I mean, we knew if I didn't know that you had been a high-level athlete, that would have been the first question I asked. I would have said, she's done this before. She's applied this kind of effort and sense of urgency and focus somewhere else before.
Right.
So for the young leaders out there listening, or the people that aren't even in leadership roles yet, the people that work hard and try to get there, intentionally try to get there, they often don't. I want to be the CEO. The people that just work hard and let the chips fall where they may, if they're in a good company, it's going to work out well for them. Agree?
I completely agree. And sometimes waiting for the chips to fall that's a hard thing to do when you're at a point in your life where you really feel like you should be climbing the ladder. But Mike, I could not agree more with you that sometimes a little bit of patience and just staying true to, what's important to yourself, or this, going back to that plan. There were several times throughout my time at Kforce where, people had offered me other opportunities from some of our different business units, and they sounded really attractive at the time. It was like, yeah, let's go do this. But at the end of the day, it didn't marry up with ultimately where I wanted my future to be. I wanted to have a big scope. I wanted to be in the core and bread and butter of technology, of what we do at Kforce. And that patience, it's so hard to do, especially if you don't have support. So this is where I would say is develop that community that is going to cut it to you straight, whatever that might be, and have them available for you as a mentor or as a personal board of directors or what have you, because that patience is hard, but it is really necessary to keep you on the path.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, and you've done well, and you're at the executive level now. You have been for a good while, many years now, Jenn. And I want you to roll back to, the Jenn that was in her first leadership role, knowing what you know now. What advice would you give that young Jenn? And what would you say? Because the advice I'm asking you for is, what are you going to give these 25-year-old leaders, 35-year-old leaders listening to this right now?
Right. Collateral duties are a very important part of skill development and relationship building. So if you're asked to take on a special project or to lend a hand, in maybe an area that isn't your dedicated focus area, I say yes. As long as it's not going to compromise the day-to-day, I say yes, do it. I took every opportunity I could to be a part of a special project or to stand up a new team, or, we offshored some work in the Philippines. Absolutely, sign me up. You need me to go there? I'm there. And those opportunities created, new relationships that they exposed me to new people outside of my circle that I otherwise wouldn't have been exposed to. And those are some of the relationships that I call on today, almost 20 years later. Plus, you're also learning different skills. And maybe it's not like, a life-changing skill, but it could be something that you can use. And there's been many instances where I'm like, I'm really glad I did that because it helped me do this today. So that would be one thing, collateral duties. The second thing is, don't fall in love with your plan. My goodness, have a plan, be prepared to execute the plan, but know darn well that something's going to come up. So you need to divert and have a backup plan, and be ready to fall back to plan B or plan C. I see so many people, they're like, well, that was my plan and it didn't work. Well, okay, what are you going to do now? So it never works as it's supposed to. And if it does, you're lucky. So I would say, don't fall in love with your plan and just be ready, ready for the backup plan. And the last thing, hopefully this has resonated as a theme throughout this podcast, but be you. For me, that's fun, a bit silly, and, really, really, really connected to my people. So just be you. You don't have to be somebody else. You don't have to be just like the leader that sits next to you. Be you, be true. And that's really where you will, connect with those on your team and your partners. So those would be my three main takeaways over the last 2 decades.
Oh, excellent. A lot of wisdom packed into that. Thank you. Well, our time is coming to a close, Jenn, but I can't let you out of here without asking the fantasy question that I ask everybody at the end of the podcast. So if you were able to bring back one leader from the past and spend a day with that person, who would you select and why?
I thought about this one, Mike, a lot. I am a big space nerd. So I don't know that it would be one person. I think it might be somebody that was on the Challenger. I mean, to know you're going to maybe a safe place, maybe not a safe place. I would just love to understand, how do you make that decision for yourself and for your family, for the betterment of, Earth and living on our planet, et cetera. So I think it would be space related. Challengers is kind of a sad subject, but I feel like, there was a couple of civilians on that flight, and I would just love to know what went through their mind as they made that decision.
Yeah, great answer. I saw that happen live on TV, and there was a lot of brain power and talent on that ship. And I think there was at least one woman was a high school teacher, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Krista McAuliffe, I think her name was.
Good memory.
And and so I think so first of all, it's a great selection. Secondly, I think that probably the common thread, aside from that they were all very intelligent, sharp individuals, that I think they probably had a love of serving their fellow man,
right,
and a willingness to take risks in the process of doing it.
That's right.
I mean, you don't step on a spaceship without knowing that it's really an explosive device. I mean,
right.
when it goes wrong, it goes real wrong.
It goes real wrong,
space,
right?
And unfortunately, it did. But obviously, a lot of good has come from that tragedy. They learned a lot of things, NASA did about shortcuts and SOPs that were ignored, and knowledge and a lot of leadership lessons in that, Jen, about culture that ostracized people who would bring up things and say, hey, what about these SEALs? I'm not sure about that. Right. Well, those guys got marginalized or fired. Like, this thing is going to go that day. We don't want to hear it. And I believe that NASA had to go about and reinvent their culture, because it resulted in a national tragedy for sure. So good one there. Well, listen, I will bet that someone listening to this will want to reach out to you in some form or fashion. How do people contact you? Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. My Kforce email is jcerrito2@Kforce, the number 2. So feel free to message me there as well. I love the opportunity to connect with people, learn from maybe some of you. So Mike, I think LinkedIn or email, and if it makes sense to set up a call, I'm happy to do that as well. Great. Well, it's been a great time. I can't thank you enough for your patience and sharing your wisdom and knowledge. Great, really good episode. You're number 99, the 99th episode of the podcast. That's great. And someone close to you, Dave Dunkel, is going to be number 100. So I wanted to reach out and get someone equally special for number 1. And so that'll be a good interview. But I would selfishly ask, in addition to thanking you profusely, Jen, I would ask that you consider coming back again, because I think you have more to share with the audience. Happy to help, Mike. I've loved being a part of your network over the years, and so proud of what you're doing. It's great. You got a great thing going there, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with your audience. Happy to help in the future if I can. Well, thank you so much, and best of luck to you, Jen. You too, Mike. Take care of yourself. Appreciate it.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.